They call Ryan's Daughter the last great romantic epic of the silver screen, a sweeping masterpiece of sand, sea, and forbidden love that captured the very soul of Ireland. Get away out of that. It wasn't a masterpiece, it was a funeral with fireworks. Come here to me, and I'll tell ye the real story. This wasn't a movie production, it was a hostile occupation of the Dingle Peninsula that dragged on longer than the actual war it was trying to depict. You look at that poster and you see art. I look at it and I see the exact moment the studio system looked at a director's ego, handed him a blank check, and then watched in horror as he set fire to the bank. The absolute notions on display here would make a bishop kick a hole in a stained glass window. You have David Lean, a man who had just made Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago, deciding that the only way to follow up two of the biggest movies in history was to build his own personal kingdom in a bog in County Kerry and hold MGM hostage until he got the perfect cloud formation. They say it's a story about a woman trapped in a loveless marriage. Stop the lights. It's a documentary about a film crew trapped in a loveless marriage with their director. The critics didn't just dislike it, they gathered around it like a pack of wolves and tore strips off it until David Lean went into hiding for 14 years. I'll tell you the real story. On paper, ye couldn't fault the logic, or so the suits told themselves. The plan was simple enough. You take the greatest director alive, you give him a budget big enough to choke a donkey, and you let him make the Irish Dr. Zhivago. It was meant to be pure poetry. The script was written by Robert Bolt. The man was a legend. The cast was top tier. The location was the most beautiful place on earth. But they forgot one small thing. They forgot that David Lean didn't just want to make a movie. He wanted to control the elements. The man had a head full of notions about himself that would rival Napoleon. This yoke was meant to be a 6-month shoot. A nice summer in Ireland, get the shots, go home, count the Oscars. 6 months, not a hope, they were out there for a year. A solid year of wind, rain, and screaming matches. The budget didn't just go over, it exploded. The studio looked at the dailies and saw a tax write-off in the making, but they were too terrified to stop him. The director was God. And when God demands a storm, you don't give him a wind machine. You wait for a hurricane and hope the camera crew doesn't drown. It was a war zone disguised as a love story. Let's talk about the village. Kerry. You'd think, being in Ireland and all, they could find a nice little Irish village to film in. We have plenty of them. They're everywhere. But oh no, that wouldn't be good enough for Mr. Lean. None of the actual villages looked Irish enough for his vision. Can you believe the arrogance? He looked at the real thing and said, no, that's not authentic. So what does he do? He hires a construction crew to build an entire town from scratch on the side of a mountain. And I don't mean a movie set with cardboard fronts and wooden props. I mean he built a literal town. They laid cobblestones. They built stone houses with slate roofs. They put in drainage systems. They built a schoolhouse, a pub, a church. They spent months building this place, battling the gales coming off the Atlantic, hauling stone up a boggy track that would break the axle of a tractor. And for what? So it would look good in the wide shot. The locals thought they were all mad, pure Egypts with more money than sense, and the best part, they built it to withstand the storms, so when the production was finally over mercifully, a year later the thing was so solid they couldn't knock it down. It sat there for years, a ghost town on the cliffs, a monument to pure, unadulterated hubris. But the village was just the start of the Hames. The real problem was the weather. Now, anyone who has spent 5 minutes in Ireland knows that the weather here is a fickle beast. It rains when you want sun, it shines when you want rain, and usually it does both at the same time, just to spite you. But David Lean, in his infinite wisdom, decided he could outweigh the Irish climate. He didn't want good enough light. He wanted Lean-esque light. He wanted specific cloud shadows moving across the beach at specific speeds. The crew would spend hours, days, sometimes weeks, sitting on their equipment in the pouring rain, waiting for a hole in the clouds. They called it David's Gap. They'd be sitting there soaked to the bone, miserable, drinking tea that went cold in seconds, just staring at the sky. And suddenly, a little break would appear, the first assistant director would scream, "We have a gap, roll sound," and by the time the camera was up to speed, the gap was gone and the rain was lashing down again. Stop the lights. It was an absolute circus. There was a scene, a simple love scene in a forest with bluebells, just a nice romantic moment. In a normal movie, you'd shoot it in an afternoon. Maybe bring in some fake flowers if the season was wrong. Not David Lean. He wanted real bluebells. But bluebells only bloom for a few weeks a year, and they get ruined if the rain hits them too hard. So they waited, and they waited. The actors were on standby. The crew was on standby. The money was burning in a bonfire of cash while they watched flowers grow. When the flowers finally bloomed, it was raining. When the sun finally came out, the flowers were dead. So what did they do? Did they move on? Did they rewrite the scene? Get away out of that? They imported thousands of bluebells? Or they painted things blue? The stories change depending on who you ask, but the madness is the same. It was perfectionism weaponized against common sense. The production manager must have been crying himself to sleep every night, looking at the ledger and seeing flower budget rivaling the GDP of a small nation. And then there was Robert Mitchum. Now, Mitchum was a Hollywood star of the old school. He was cool, he was cynical, and he had zero tolerance for all guff. He took the role because he thought it would be a nice holiday. He figured he'd come to Ireland, drink a few pints of Guinness, charm the locals, do a bit of acting, and go home. He didn't sign up for a military boot camp run by a dictator in a tweed cap. Mitchum and Lean were like oil and water. Lean would spend 3 hours setting up a shot of a teacup. Mitchum would walk onto the set, take one look at the fuss, and say, "Just tell me where to stand so I can go home." There's a famous story, and it sums up the whole disaster perfectly, about Mitchum getting so bored waiting for Lean to fix the lighting that he just wandered off. They found him hours later directing traffic in the middle of the village, or maybe it was just him standing on the road staring at sheep. He was acting the maggot because he was bored out of his tree. One day, Lean tried to give Mitchum direction on how to walk across the beach. Lean was obsessed with the physicality of the character, wanting a specific limp or a specific gait. He started acting it out, showing Mitchum exactly how to place his feet on the sand. Mitchum, who had been acting in movies since before Lean knew which end of the camera to look through, just stared at him. He didn't say a word. He just looked at this man, this auteur with his head in the clouds, and you could see the contempt radiating off him. Mitchum allegedly said, "David, I have 2 styles of acting, with a horse and without a horse. Which one do you want?" It was pure devilment. Mitchum spent half the shoot allegedly enjoying herbal refreshments just to cope with the boredom. He didn't care about the art, he cared about his sanity. And frankly, looking back at the chaos, he was the only one making any sense. He treated the absurdity with the disrespect it deserved. But if Mitchum was difficult, Christopher Jones was a catastrophe. Jones was hired to play the British officer, the romantic lead. He was supposed to be dashing, intense, the kind of man a woman would betray her community for. In reality, the poor Egypt was away wit de ferries from the minute he landed. He was terrified of David Lean, paralysed by him. He couldn't act. He couldn't remember his lines. He looked like a deer in the headlights in every single frame. There were rumours he was on something, or that he was having a breakdown, or maybe he was just out of his depth. Whatever it was, he was a dead weight. David Lean, being the tyrant he was, didn't try to help the lad. He tried to break him. He'd scream at him, humiliate him in front of the crew. It got so bad that they eventually had to dub his entire performance. That's right, the romantic lead in a multi-million-dollar epic doesn't speak a single word of his own dialogue. Every grunt, every whisper, every line of love poetry was recorded by someone else in a studio in London months later. Stop the lights. Imagine the scene on set. Jones is mumbling, looking at his feet, shaking like a leaf. Lean is purple with rage, screaming about motivation. The crew is standing in the mud, soaked, wondering if they'll ever see their families again. And the producers are watching the dailies, seeing a lead actor who looks like a waxwork dummy and realising they've bet the farm on a man who can't talk. It was an absolute hames, a dog's dinner of the highest order. And then the piece de resistance, the storm. The climax of the film involves a massive storm battering the coast to reveal the weapons being smuggled by the rebels. Now, in a sane world, you film some big waves, you use a water tank, you use special effects. Not David Lean. He wanted the biggest storm the Atlantic could throw at him. He wanted the actors in the water, in the danger zone. They waited for months for the right storm. And when it came, it was a monster, a genuine hurricane. The waves were 30 feet high, smashing against the cliffs with the force of a bomb. It was dangerous. It was stupid. It was lethal. And Lean was out there like a general on the front lines, screaming, "Closer! Get closer!" The camera crew was strapped to the rocks. The lenses were getting soaked with salt spray every 2 seconds. They had to build a special spinning glass disc in front of the lens just to fling the water off so they could see anything. The actors, poor Sarah Miles and the rest of them, were thrown into this freezing, violent washing machine. They were battered, bruised, and terrified. It wasn't acting, it was survival. They were clawing at the rocks, gasping for air, looking at the director with genuine hatred in their eyes. And Lean, he was in ecstasy. He was capturing the raw power of nature, regardless of who got killed in the process. He didn't care that the insurance company was having a heart attack. He didn't care that the local Coast Guard was probably on speed dial. He wanted his shot, and fair play to the lunatic, he got it. The storm sequence is incredible. It looks terrifying because it was terrifying, but was it worth the risk? Was it worth nearly drowning your cast and crew? It was the behaviour of a head the ball, a man who had lost all sense of proportion. Let's not forget the love story itself. The whole film hinges on the chemistry between Sarah Miles and Christopher Jones. But remember, Jones was barely functioning. There was zero chemistry. It was like watching a woman fall in love with a cardboard cutout. So Lean had to manufacture it. He had to use every trick in the book, music, lighting, editing, to make it look like these two people weren't strangers who barely spoke. There's a story that during the filming of the love scene in the forest, the one with the bluebells, Jones was so out of it that he couldn't perform, not just acting-wise, but physically. The scene required a certain level of intimacy. Lean was shouting, the crew was watching, and Jones was catatonic. It was a disaster, an absolute shambles. They eventually cobbled it together with editing, but the raw footage must have been painful to watch. It was a monument to bad casting and worse management. The locals in Dingle made a fortune, though. That's the one silver lining. They fleeced the production for everything they could, and why wouldn't they? Here comes this giant Hollywood circus with more money than sense, tearing up their roads and taking over their pubs. The local hoteliers, the pub owners, the farmers who rented out their fields, they were the real winners. They looked at David Lean and saw a walking ATM. "Oh, you need a donkey, Mr. Lean? Well, this is a special acting donkey. That'll be £50 a day. You need us to stop burning turf because the smoke is ruining your shot? That'll cost you." It was pure gone-bean behaviour, and I respect it. They saw the madness and they monetised it. The production team was handing out cash like it was confetti just to keep the locals happy. There are houses in Dingle today that were built on the back of Ryan's daughter. Entire families lived off the overtime from that shoot for a decade. The movie might have been a flop, but the local economy was booming. And finally, the release. The movie comes out, it's nearly 4 hours long, it has an intermission, it has an overture, it presents itself as the most important film ever made. And the critics destroyed it. They hated it. They called it bloated, self-indulgent, empty. Pauline Kael, the most famous critic in America, practically wrote a hit piece on it. She mocked the scale of it. She asked why a simple story about a village affair needed the production value of the Normandy landings. David Lean was devastated. He didn't just take it as a bad review, he took it as a personal attack on his soul. He had spent a year in the rain, he had built a village, he had nearly drowned his cast, and for what? To be told he was a bore? He gathered the critics in a hotel room in New York to argue with them. Can you imagine? The director of Lawrence of Arabia sitting there, pleading his case to a bunch of journalists, trying to explain why the bluebells were important. It was tragic. It was the final act of a man who had totally lost touch with reality. He was so hurt by the reaction that he didn't make another film for 14 years. 14 years. He took his ball and went home. He retreated to his house and sulked for over a decade. That's the level of ego we're dealing with. If he couldn't be God, he didn't want to play at all. Was it just bad luck? Not a bit of it. It was a monument to pure egoistry. It was a war against common sense. The studio system, a dangerous place because it gave brilliant men enough rope to hang themselves, and David Lean used every inch of it. He made a film that was beautiful to look at but empty inside. A chocolate egg with nothing in the middle. The irony is, people look back at it now and say, oh, they don't make them like that anymore. And they're right. They don't. Because if a director tried to pull that kind of carry on today, the studio would fire him within a week. You can't spend a year in a bog waiting for a cloud anymore. You can't build a town just because you don't like the look of the real ones. Was it a masterpiece? Or was the director just ahead the ball with a camera? The truth is, it was both. They flew too close to the sun, and the film is the footage of the wings melting. Lean wanted to capture the truth of Ireland, but all he captured was his own obsession. He mistook size for quality. He thought that if he made the waves big enough, the audience wouldn't notice that the story was small. As me old fella used to say, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. You can build a village, you can import flowers, you can nearly kill Robert Mitchum, but if the heart isn't there, it's just a very expensive home movie. Ryan's Daughter is a beautiful, stunning, boring mess. It's a testament to what happens when no one says no to a genius. So now you know where the money really went. It went into the mud of County Kerry. It went into the pockets of the local publicans. It went into the therapy bills of the cast, and that's the dirt from the cutting room floor. This one is specifically for member Van Pelt, a man with the patience of a saint to sit through the history and the good taste to know a proper disaster when he sees one. Thanks for keeping the lights on, you legend. Right, I'm off. Slán cha.